Welcome to the HR Community Podcast. My name is Shane O'Neill, founder of Civitas Talent, the HR and HSE recruitment community. Each episode we will host HR leaders and discuss their journey and discover best practice HR solutions across the HR industry. Whether you're a CEO, HR executive, or operating across the wider HR space, this podcast is for you. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to comment and share your reviews. Enjoy the episode. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Community Podcast. This morning, I'm pleased to be joined with Stacey Brewer. Stacey is the head of HR for Orica. Good morning, Stacey.
Hi, Shane. How are you?
I'm very good. And it's Friday, so I'm even better. Stacey, tell us a little bit about, firstly, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, know who Orica are. Tell us a little bit about what they do for the listeners that don't. And then I'd like you to maybe give us a bit of an overview as to what your role is.
Yeah, sure. So Orica, for those who don't know, is one of the leading mining and infrastructure solution providers globally. So I suppose in layman's terms, what that means is that they produce and supply explosives, blasting systems, mining chemicals. They also provide geotechnical monitoring. And in more recent times, we've been getting very much into the cutting edge digital solutions side of things, as well as providing a comprehensive range of services to the mining industry, among others. My role at Orica, and I suppose I should sort of give a sense of the size of the company. We've got about 12,500 employees plus around 2,000 contractors, and we cover 47 countries globally today, but that's growing all the time. So constantly looking at new markets, which is really exciting. Yeah. My role as the head of HR operations is to provide transactional HR services and payroll to all of our employees globally. Yeah. And in addition to that, I also have part of my team who is responsible for all of our HR systems, processes, and data globally. So that essentially means that all roads eventually lead back to us in HR in some way, shape, or form. And we also do get pretty heavily involved in running a range of transformational HR projects. So in the past, what that has meant is we've delivered the HR service catalogue, for instance. We have overseen functional organisational model reviews, I suppose. And we've done things more recently like a complete overhaul of our employment letter templates. So you can imagine over 47 countries, we had more than 600 templates. We've reduced that back down to about 100 with the view to starting to move towards automated generation. Awesome. Most recently, the biggest project that we've had greenlit, which is really exciting, is called the Global Payroll Project, and that's a multi-million-dollar 3-year project that will consolidate 34 payroll systems and vendors globally down to one. So that's been a huge undertaking for us to get started on.
Amazing. And I'm really interested to sort of probe a little bit more about the payroll side of things, because it's not a topic some of the other guests we've had on have managed to talk about it in depth. But before we do, take us back a little, because when I look at your journey in HR, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looked like you sort of entered with the more sort of traditional HR sort of advisory generalist, and then it kind of went from there. You got into a whole range of different elements of not just HR but change and So sort of walk us through a little bit of that.
I've been really lucky with my career. It's been very varied, and I've gotten to experience lots of different facets of HR. And I suppose when I left school and applied to uni, I wasn't so sure what I wanted to do. I was always pretty commercially minded, and in VCE, I guess what I focused on were subjects like accounting and business management, and those kinds of things are the things that I really enjoyed. So I went for a generalist business degree, and ultimately, I think for one of my subjects, we had a speaker come in who was from a HR background, and she spoke about working in mobility. And I remember thinking, God, that sounds exciting. Imagine getting to manage people moving all over the globe for their career and to further their career. That sounds so cool. It's really not that cool. It's what I found out later. But that probably is what really hooked me into thinking HR probably is where I really want to be. From there, a notice board at uni advertising a vacation role at Rio Tinto in their HR department is what I ended up applying for. And I basically joined that company and didn't leave for 10 years.
Amazing.
And was super lucky with my career there. I mean, as you said, I started in a very much a generalist capacity. And back then that encompassed everything from what you would see in the advisory space around advising on policies and procedures, but it also encompassed a fair amount of transactional HR as well. So we didn't have centralized services back then. And we certainly moved there, and I got to see that shift and that cycle run through at Rio Tinto as it tends to. It's sort of, as we know, we tend to go through decentralized to centralized on a cycle. Right. And then ultimately I got to specialize in global mobility eventually, which was really exciting. That led me to a secondment in London for a couple of years to lead the function from EMEA. Yeah. And eventually I moved into projects. And that's, I think, where I found my passion. It kind of enabled me to bring together the pieces around process that I really enjoyed, together with that, ring fencing a piece of work and being able to see it through from start to finish, which is probably what I like the most about projects, is that you get that sense of achievement and delivery and getting to see what you've implemented and how it has bettered things for the business.
Yeah, exactly. Did that also spark your, I guess, passion within that sort of industry, within the mining and the resources and the more industrial side? Yeah,
look, it sort of seems to be where I've ended up landing. I kind of, after doing that stint in the mining industry, although I haven't gone back into a specific mining company, most of what I've done since then has been very mining adjacent. So going into Tech Pivot, and then obviously with Orica as well. The only difference being the stint I did at Australia Post, which was really nice to kind of see how a different business operated. Yes, I love the mining industry. I think it's very interesting, and there's always a lot going on. And I think the benefit of the companies that I've worked in is, in lots of different ways, they've been at the forefront of trends and being quite progressive, and they've allowed a degree of kind of creativity or even entrepreneurialism to, if you see opportunities in there that you want to take hold of and drive forward, they've allowed me to do that. Which is definitely something that kind of I think I fostered that at Rio Tinto, and that's enabled me to take that into other companies. Awesome. But I think more so than that, I mean, Intertek and Orica are both manufacturing, which is quite different to Tier 1 mining. Both of them are different. They operate in slightly different ways as manufacturing companies, but it's been a nice contrast for me because Rio Tinto was very much the glory days when I was there. There was a lot of money to spend on initiatives for the most part. And I think going into those manufacturing environments has really helped me to see, how do you do things when the money isn't flowing as steadily, and how can you be more creative around, there's a lot you can actually do without bringing consultants or paying for new systems, just by kind of altering processes and the way in which we do things. So that was a really nice way to kind of round out my experience, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And just on that as well, Stacey, such a great experience, because obviously, as you said, when the industry and the organization are going through that boom phase, and there's a lot of money to spend, but when you're sort of having to pull back, which I'm seeing a lot of companies now globally having to do, such a great experience at that level to gain that sort of commerciality, because you can sort of operate on both sides of the fence. Like, I mean, how would you describe working in that type of environment? You mentioned creativity, was there anything else that you sort of see, particularly in this market, because that sounds very similar to what we're going through now, where companies are probably getting a bit leaner on their spend, a lot of restructures, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of announcements about redundancies. So, yeah.
I think the thing that it's taught me is to try and stay ahead of that. So you never get too comfortable in those peak periods where the money is flowing, and it's great, and you harness that and you see it for what it is. But I always try and think 2 steps ahead about, again, things run in cycles. They tend to run in cycles. And different factors like the pandemic can impact significantly and change things quite quickly. Yeah. So I think you have to always keep a commercial mindset of, are we doing things as effectively and efficiently as we possibly could, regardless of what else is going on? Can we hand on heart say we're doing this in the best way possible for the most reasonable cost to the business? And I think, Orica, as I said, is at its core, it is a mining and infrastructure solutions provider. We are not a provider of functional services like HR, finance, etc. So the best thing that we can do for the business is run those processes and those functions as efficiently as possible in order to support the business to deliver on their strategy and their objectives. So part of that is the strategic offering and what we bring to the table around the services we provide and doing it for the best value possible.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. So you talked a little bit about your global experience, which was really cool. So you got to go back to Europe, and then you came back to Australia with Rio, or did you come back and join Ozpost, or sort of how did your journey go from there?
I came back with Rio Tinto and continued working for them for probably, I think, 2 or 3 years beyond that. So actually I came back and then pretty much went straight to Canada. And I came back as a result of the global financial crisis. At the time we were really looking at the expatriate program and how can, again, responding to the external environment, how can we start to reduce costs and do that in the most effective way for the company? Part of that was repatriating some of our expats, and I was one of them. However, at the same time, we were looking at more cost-effective ways of providing our services. And at the time, the company decided to outsource or partially outsource our global mobility function. Okay. So I sort of repatriated back here to Melbourne and then straight away went to Montreal, which is where my boss was based at the time. And we started working really intensively on that RFP process and looking at the full business process outsourcing side of things, which was really exciting for me at the time because it was the first time I'd had exposure to things like that. Yeah. So we did that, and beyond that, I worked on that engagement with the vendor that we selected for probably another year beyond the transition. And then at that point is when I moved on from Rio Tinto, probably about a year after that. So I moved to Intertech Pivot after that into an improvement type role, effectively across function wide. Awesome. And then got to Orica, where I'm sort of going with the next couple of questions. So got to Orica, and then the role that you're in now, tell us a little bit about how you managed to sort of get into more of the payroll and side of it amongst the other services, and what's that actually like? Because a lot of companies I recruit for, it obviously varies, but payroll is a very separate function to HR or vice versa. So tell us a little bit about your transition into that space. Yeah, sure. So it's happened a little bit by stealth, I think, in some ways. So when I first joined Orica, I joined in the role at the time, we were in the midst of a huge SAP implementation across the organisation. And the role that I came into was called the HR Global Process and Data Owner. So it was really ring fencing that piece of what my team now currently owns, which is all the HR systems, processes and data across the company, which encompass payroll systems at the time, as well as success factors, as well as various learning systems that we had in play, et cetera, et cetera. As part of that, the company had only just signed up to look at some payroll system consolidation, and they were just embarking on that project. But we went through some changes on the resourcing side, and where my role started out as simply being the chair on the steering committee for that piece of work to see through the implementation, I just sort of started incrementally getting more and more involved and more I suppose, engaged in that piece of work. And I think over time what that meant was the project came to me.
Yeah.
Through various changes that happened within the team. I ended up taking ownership of that particular project. And I also started looking at the bigger picture around that particular project was focused on a system consolidation across a particular region, which was Australia Pacific. But we definitely have a much broader landscape across all regions in the company where we had pretty low visibility around what was going on. We had a lot of organic growth, and through that organic growth, we had just kind of set up very quickly without necessarily having a full strategy across the payroll landscape of how we start to fold in new companies and new country entry so that we have this consolidated view of how we're running payroll and that we're doing that compliantly and accurately in a very consistent way. So that sort of gave way to a bit of a passion in that area. I mean, I, like everyone, love getting paid. So that I think is born out of that. But it's a really interesting space, and there's always something going on in that area. And I think at the same time that all of that was happening, because I've been at Orica for 4 years now, we've seen is obviously a much stronger focus coming through, particularly in the Australian market, around payroll compliance and wage theft, and so much attention being given to those issues that we really have to give ourselves the comfort and the confidence that we're doing things absolutely correctly, because we owe it to our employees and more so to our shareholders as well.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a huge advocate for data, particularly within the HR space, when it sort of link into a whole range of facets and, performance, REM, all that kind of stuff. And we've had some guests on here, recently who've talked a lot about it. But, how important do you think it is for HR leaders, Stacey, to be heavily involved in that side of the business, the systems, the data, that kind of the payroll, the compliance? Because like I said earlier, some organizations keep it quite separate. How important, is it for a HR leader to be heavily involved in it?
Look, I think for a well-rounded HR leader, it's really important for them to have some level of insight as to how those things work. So if I kind of break up what the question is in terms of payroll specifically versus HR technology, does every kind of HR leader need to have a deep understanding of how payroll works? Not necessarily, but I think it is important to understand the linkages, and that payroll really brings to life really critically important facets of how we set up our workforce, such as how we execute on our enterprise bargaining agreements, which is huge for us. In Orica, we have substantial sort of union representation, particularly around our sites. So making sure that we are executing on the terms of those accurately and compliantly is critically important. And the connection between those things, I think, starts from negotiation of those agreements through to how well are we going to be able to execute on this? Is it very complex and difficult to understand and needs legal interpretation to ensure that we're doing it correctly? Or are we doing it in such a way that is going to be easy to execute on, easy to get right, easy to see where it could go off the rails? So there's lots of connections there that you might not see from the 50,000 feet view. And I do think it is worthwhile understanding how those connections come into play. And obviously there's connection points with other things like performance and reward as well, and the annual cycle for that. So I do think it helps as a HR leader to understand the interconnectedness and how payroll actually brings that to life for our employees, which is for the most part the most important part of why they come to work.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of HR technology, I do think that is critically important for every HR leader these days, because technology just brings every part of the process to life. There are so many options today, and particularly when you look at the changes that we've seen in how the workforce wants to show up in the last couple of years through the pandemic, there is such a leaning now towards a preference for hybrid working or completely remote working. our reliance on technology solutions is bigger than ever. And I think people's expectations are higher than ever about how easy that should be and how seamless and integrated that should be. And the better we are at delivering that and making the HR part simple for our employees, I think the better result for the company overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have a lot of aspiring leaders and upcoming leaders within the HR space that sort of tune into the podcast. And I did sort of want to ask the question, because you've traveled a lot with your role, what would you say would be some advice for people listening? It doesn't have to be aspiring, obviously, it could be anyone listening, but for those that are listening thinking, I want to travel, I want to see the world, but I also want to work and I don't want to take too much time away from my career in case I lose the momentum. What advice would you give someone thinking like that? And the second part of the question would be, how do you think it's set up your career into where you are now, Stacey, having gained that experience globally?
I think the broader your experiences are, and you can broaden your experience through a number of different avenues, but it's only going to make you more credible and better in the workplace, I think. Understanding things from other people's perspective is probably the number one piece of advice I would give to people coming into HR and how they want to grow their careers, is having an understanding of the business and of the business's people is critical to becoming a really good HR leader, I think. And part of the way that I've been able to do that is to get experience globally in other countries. And I've travelled beyond living in other countries. I've been able to travel a lot with most of my roles as well, which is, it just gives you that understanding that you can't necessarily get sitting in an office in the middle of a capital city.
Yeah.
Is what is life really like for people who are working on a mining site in a remote location, and what is their exposure to technology, and how much time do they really get to do things like look at a pay slip and apply for leave and do online learning and all those kinds of things that we have great ideas around in corporate land, but we don't necessarily understand the mechanics of how that might work out for somebody who is based in Mount Isa, for example, or somewhere deep in Russia, for example. Russia's probably, not a great example these days, but back in the day we did have some offices there that were extremely remote because of the nature of what we do. Many of our sites, you are not even able to take a mobile phone onto the site. So getting that level of understanding, and in some ways you can't get that without actually seeing it. I went to Manila last year and one of our remote sites in the Philippines last year and met with some of our local payroll administrators, and really, I had heard a lot about the manual nature of what they do today many times over the phone. But being there in the office and seeing all of the punch cards that they have to manually type into a system every week,
old school,
was something completely different for me.
Yeah.
And it creates that urgency in terms of, we have to do better here. I mean, this is such a risk in terms of getting our people paid on time and accurately. It's such a risk that we only have one person doing this. What can we do to make it better? So it just gives you such a level of insight and empathy and understanding that you wouldn't otherwise get. If you're keen to travel, join a global organisation is my advice, and the opportunities, I think, will be there. And if you're ready to go, a lot of these companies are really keen to embrace that and to send you where you need to go. It comes, of course, with being really good at what you do. It's expensive to send people around globally, but there's lots of different ways you can do that too. It doesn't necessarily need to be on an expatriate assignment with all of the bells and whistles that come with that. Yeah. It may be that you move yourself somewhere internationally, that you happen to have an office, and you let people know, hey, I'm available, and we can make something happen there. I think let people know what your ambitions are, be great at what you do, and those opportunities will come, and they will only make you better in terms of what you can do for the business and how you can grow your career.
Awesome. Love that. And you get to see some of the world that you might not even have thought it exists. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Oh, cool. Quick couple of questions for you before we wrap up as well, Stacey. So, most influential person?
Most influential person. I think in terms of my career, I think I would say I did have a leader at Rio Tinto who I think has influenced the trajectory of my career substantially. And her name was Louise Charbonneau. Her and I had probably a wobbly start, but I think ultimately she took a lot of chances on me and moved me into roles as big development opportunities, initially to run that team in EMEA from London. And then beyond that, to get very heavily involved in that BPO process that we ran around the function. Both things that I hadn't previously done that she really trusted me with and kind of provided me with enough support to stretch me and get me to where I needed to be. And that's influenced me a lot.
Love that. Amazing. Best lesson learned?
I learn lessons all the time.
Still learning.
I've got so many I could say. I think one of the biggest ones is keep an open dialogue, talk about issues as soon as they arise. A lot of the time, this stops things from becoming much bigger and uglier issues. And I think that it keeps things, moving in a way that's really productive and efficient as well. I think the other big one is advocate for yourself. And that's probably, that's across the board, but particularly for the ladies out there, I think it's something that over things like salary negotiation, we have a real crisis of conscience around that. And often just accept whatever's offered. And I think I try to give as much coaching and advice as I can to people that I see up and coming within the industry as well, around how I've gone about things like that in my career to really advocate for myself as much as possible.
Yeah, I love that. And who do you inspire, Stacey?
Wow, that's a really sort of presumptuous question to presume that I'm inspiring people. I hope I'm inspiring my team with the way that I operate and the level of care and support that I give them, and hopefully also coaching and development to be the best that they can be. Yeah. So I would say, yes, I hope for that for my team. Also for, as I mentioned, up and comers within my own network that I try to give as much advice to around how I've gotten to where I've gotten and the kinds of things that I would have found helpful when I was coming up. Hopefully I'm inspiring them as well.
Fantastic. What frustrates you?
Laziness in the workplace frustrates me, I think. I thrive in environments where, there's constantly things that come up in the workplace that we could say, that's not my job, it's not my responsibility, and yet you could do something about it, and you're probably well placed to do something about it. And I really thrive when I connect with similar-minded people who are like, you know what, it's probably not our space, but let's get together and try and do something with this and move it forward. Yeah. So it does frustrate me when you're confronted by that attitude of, well, no, this is for you, I'll watch you do it, or I'll step back, and let somebody else do it.
Awesome. I'm going to ask a question that I've not asked before, but given you've seen so much of the world, I'm being a bit greedy here and selfish. I'm more interested because I love traveling. Okay. What's your sort of most favorite place in the world that you visited? And the second question is, where is the next place that you really want to travel to?
Okay. I can tell you the next place that I am traveling to. Yeah. Which I'm pretty excited about. I'm getting to go to Lisbon in a week. Awesome. To bring together the HR team across EMEA. So there'll be 3 HR leaders that will come together, and we're going to run a workshop across our teams and do a bit of a refresh on our operating model. So I'm pretty excited. That's probably exciting. One of the nicest places that I've gotten to go for a while. God, the best place is so difficult, isn't it? Because tough, everywhere it's hard to compare places. I did love Montreal. Yeah. even with all of its weather extremes, I found I really liked Montreal. I think is probably one of my favourite places. But for the most part, I really liked everywhere that I've gotten to travel. It's a fun part of the job for the most part. The travel can be a bit onerous, but once you get there, there's sort of nothing like getting to meet people and bond on that, personal level.
100%. Awesome. Amazing. Well, look, thanks so much, Stacey. Thanks for joining us today. Some really great insight there. Obviously, I probably talked a little bit too much on the travel side, but that sort of touches my heart quite a bit. But thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to all our listeners for tuning in, and goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Shane. It was great to be here.
Thank you for tuning in to the HR Community Podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and share your views and comments below. This podcast was brought to you by Civitas Talent, the HR and HSC recruitment community. Whether you're a candidate looking for a new role or organization looking to secure brand new talent for your team, please get in touch with us today. Thank you.